My guest today is Jennifer Lewis, the Democratic candidate for the 6th congressional seat being vacated by Representative Bob Goodlatte. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. So we'll just get started.
Sure.
As I'm sure you know, the 6th district is rated as a solid Republican seat. So I want to know, as a progressive Democratic candidate, why run?
Well, first I'd like to point out that in this district, 54% of the people did not show up and vote in the presidential election. So there's a huge segment of the population that we don't even know how they vote because they don't show up and vote. And when you think of 54 didn't vote in the presidential election, it's even less than that of the people who come out and vote when you talk about congressional races, and even lower than that when you talk about city council and school board. So we just have a big voter turnout issue in the 6th district and all across the country. So we are focusing on the people who don't typically show up to the polls or don't show up every year. So we're reaching out to those folks, and we're just out canvassing every day, making sure that we can reach as many people as possible.
Perfect. So additionally, sort of off that question, what about your background makes you particularly qualified to run for this seat?
Sure. So I have been really involved in my community for the last 11 years, organizing people and fighting for our values of the 6th district. And my background of mental health, I'm a mental health worker. That is something that I feel really is needed in Washington right now. And I'm a problem solver, and I'm very motivated, and I have high energy. And I think it's just time that we get fresh new faces and fresh new ideas in Washington and in Richmond. And it's time for new leadership.
Yeah, sort of off that, you said that you would not vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House were you elected to the House. So could you expand on that a little bit, why you think that change needs to be made?
So I really respect and honor her service to our country. She's been a great leader, and I fully respect that. But again, like I said, it's just time for new leadership. I support term limits, whereas my opponent does not support term limits. And I think it's really important that people who are in leadership roles take that time to mentor people so that we do have the next kind of phase of leaders coming into office and holding these positions. Somebody should not hold that position of power for so long. So it's time for new ideas and new people.
So as you, Delegate Klein, have run throughout this campaign, you've had some issues setting up debates that you both agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Finch, who teaches at this university, wrote an op-ed about a nonpartisan Virginia debate commission for future election cycles. I was wondering if that was something you would support.
Fully would support that. And it's just unfortunate that our opponent is not more willing to have more debates. We accepted, I think, and I might not have the numbers correct, but I think we accepted 8 out of the 9 that were offered to us. And the one that we didn't accept, it was sponsored by the pipeline company. So that's why we denied that one. But it's so important that we get out in front of as many people and give the voters of the 6th district as many opportunities as they can to hear from both of us. Because I don't want anyone blindly voting for either party. I want all of our voters to be educated on the issues, educated on the candidates, and then they can make up their decision of who they want to vote for based on their values.
So you mentioned not blindly voting for either party.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to be elected, you would be stepping in most likely to a Democrat majority House.
Mm-hmm.
What are some issues that you don't agree with major Democratic leadership on, and how would you address those if you were elected?
Sure. So one of the biggest issues that before running for Congress and even now that I've pushed back against, especially the Virginia Democratic Party, is the pipeline issue. If you weren't aware, the previous governor was a Democratic governor, Terry McAuliffe, and our current Democratic governor, Ralph Northam, are both supportive of these pipeline projects. So that's something that I've pushed back against very hard, that I do not think that these pipeline projects are Democratic value, and we should not be supporting these pipelines. But another issue, and it's one of my biggest platform issues, is anti-corruption. I don't think Democrats should be, and Republicans either, should be taking money from any kind of corporate PACs, special interest groups. I believe that all politicians should only be taking money from personal donations from people, so that when they are elected, they are held accountable to those people and not any kind of special interest groups or any corporations.
Perfect. You put out a statement on Judge Kavanaugh, and you're running in what's being termed the Year of the Woman.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on Dr. Ford's testimony in front of the Senate on the 27th, and how do you think that situation is going to play into voting patterns in this Year of the Woman?
Yeah. Well, first I would like to start answering that question with my background. So my first job out of college, I worked in a domestic violence safe house, and I was a rape crisis counselor. So in that job, I have sat in the emergency room and held the hand of a woman as she went through a rape kit. I've taken a family to the police station to file a restraining order against an abusive partner. So having that background, it's so absolutely necessary that we believe people's stories as the first step of the investigation process. Of course, there have been very few rare situations where people lied about an assault. So that's why investigations are so important. And when people say, well, why don't you report it? Why aren't women reporting these things? I just like to give one example, and that's our rape kits. To go through an invasive rape exam after being assaulted and raped, you then have to go through an exam, which is very invasive. Then that rape kit goes and sits on a shelf. The backlog of our rape kits is probably a huge reason that women don't come forward, because what's the point? And so often women aren't believed and women are blamed. How much were you drinking? What were you wearing? And it's really unfortunate that still in the year 2018, women are not paid the same for the same work. We don't have the same rights. And it's time for that to change. And what we've seen as we're going around and canvassing, we're doing, meet and greets, house parties to meet with constituents. Women are really upset, and women are sick and tired, and they have been pushed to the brink of they're ready to do something. And I think we will see a very high voter turnout for women. And one experience is we had a meet and greet, and it was, I think it was last Friday. And when I got to the house of the woman who was hosting it, she had the TV on all the news coverage of the Kavanaugh hearing. And as people, the guests came, everybody sat down in the living room. And it turned up into this therapy session of women wanting to share their stories. And it was so needed. Like, women just wanted to get this off their chest. And so many women spoke of their own assaults and their own rapes, stories they've never told anybody, stories they've never even told their husband. They wanted to share that night because it was so they just needed to get that off of their chest. And it was so great because as these women are sharing their personal stories, all the men stayed quiet. And then after all the women got to kind of share their story and we're sitting there, the men just stood up and they're like, we are so behind all of you women. We support you, we love you, we want equality too. And it turned into a really beautiful moment. So I think the silver lining for all of what's going on is that we're starting to have these conversations more out in the open, and we're making it more acceptable to say, hey, this happened to me. And so I really applaud all the survivors that are coming out and being willing to go through everything that they're gonna go through when they go public. Because that's got to be one of the hardest decisions, is to go personal about your own assault.
Absolutely. So part of why you're competing in a really red district is a part of redistricting that's going to be happening in 2020. So how do you envision the redrawing of Virginia's congressional districts in 2020?
Well, they need to be done definitely by a third-party, nonpartisan group. I went to a Virginia 2021 meeting a couple of years ago, and at that time, they showed a map of how a UVA student group drew the map, and it just made sense. You looked at the map and it made sense. And as someone who's out there canvassing every day, we're doing a small business tour and we're doing all of these great things, you've got to look at the map every day to figure out, is that really in our district? Is that really not in our district? And it suppresses the vote, because there's so many people that we meet that they don't know what district they're in. In Congress, I think it's just a little bit easier because they're bigger districts. I have been very active in the Democratic Party for 11 years, like I said before. And so I've canvassed and door knocked and done all of the work for all of the House of Delegate candidates. Every race since the first Obama election, I've been out there volunteering. And so many people don't know who their representatives are. So I would like knock on a door and say, well, is your current representative, you know, Dickie Bell or Steve Landis or, you know, Bob Goodlatte? So we need to make sure that we do address gerrymandering, because it is suppressing voters. And we definitely don't want that, because as I said earlier, we have such a low voter turnout as it is. We need to make voting as easy as possible, and we need to provide that voter education as well. Like, this is your district, these are your representatives. And I have been fighting for that for 11 years, is just providing that education for people. This is, you know, the democratic process in voting is so important. So many people fought and died for that right, for so many of us to have, that it's our responsibility and our duty to vote in every election.
So there are some other races going on in Virginia, including for Senator Kane's seat. He's going against Corey Stewart for his seat. You've been endorsed by Senator Warner, but as far as I know, not by Senator Kane, who's running for re-election. Why do you think that you've not gotten endorsement from Senator Kane?
Probably just hasn't gotten around to it. We have been on the campaign trail a ton with Senator Kane. We do events together all the time, and we actually had this weekend, we were supposed to do events with him in the 6th district, but they got canceled because he's got to be up in DC for the Kavanaugh or the votes. But he's been extremely supportive. We had a whole day of events together, and we had like half an hour in between events. And he pulled me aside and he's like, you want to sit down and have something to eat? I want to give you some words of advice. Yeah, yes, please. So he's been so gracious, so supportive. And the endorsement, that's just kind of logistics, but we know that he's 100% supportive of us.
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd love to come back anytime.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic.